Just as background, you want to tell us a little bit about the Currency Folk label and the formation of the label?
Well, we formed the label in 81 after we came back from Ireland, and we discovered that what was then the North Bulli band, which had planned to do a recording, which John Broomall actually had told us about while we were over in Ireland, that they wanted to do the Snow River Men on that record that they were doing. We came back, we found that had fallen through, and we decided to go ahead ourselves, and we virtually started up from there with the idea that we would use the label to promote people from this area, essentially from the Wollongong area, and use it as a sort of adjunct of the Wollongong Folk Club, and record the people who were working down here.
Well, that culminated in the compilation album Beneath the Smoke.
Yes, that was really, I suppose, that was the, in many ways, that was the high point of our sort of recording achievement, I suppose. That was the essential idea of it, was to do something like that, not necessarily on the one album, but that was the idea of it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. What about the Currency Folk Band? What's the history of that band?
Well, that began after, I hate to keep mentioning John Broomall's name, but I had worked with an Irish band which had a very tortuous history and sort of collapsed in great confusion, and eventually re-emerged as Shonaki without, I wasn't in it when it re-emerged, but John was the community arts officer down here, and Brian Mitchell was the major force behind the old Shonaki, and they didn't know each other, and I introduced them, or arranged for them to meet at the old Wollongong Leagues Club here. During the course of that conversation, I referred to the fact that the sort of cohesion of the well, I suppose the classes in Irish society through the music, that there was sort of the music sort of covered all things, like Yeats's idea of the writing poems for the fly fishermen, fishing for trout in the mountains sort of thing. I saw that in the folk music in the Irish tradition, and I sort of regretted the fact that didn't exist in Australia, and John said that it did, and I started to research it after that, and I got that old book of Ron Edwards's, and went through that and discovered lots of songs that I knew from my own childhood, that my father had sung in his terrible old broken baritone voice, which we thought was much inferior to Bing Crosby in those days, which my mother was very fond of. But I began to see then that there was a tradition there, and we sort of got together, John and Beth and I, and we formed the first Currency Folk Band, which was disastrous, I might add. I don't know if you've heard about that performance. It should be legendary if it isn't. It was...
a bootleg tape.
we played at the Illawarra pub, and it was the most embarrassing half I've ever been on stage in my life. But I think actually we played two songs in different keys, John and I. I was playing accordion on both of those. I couldn't hear John, and he apparently couldn't hear me, and we played in different keys. And it was a disaster, but we sort of reformed after that, and John, I suppose, was really in and out of it at that stage, doing a fair bit of work by himself and being away from the area. And then we attempted to take music to the workplace and things like that. It was essentially that was the idea of it. Really, was to present working class music to working class people. That was essentially the idea. Your Currency, of course, was the Currency Lads and Lasses thing, an Australian firstborn sort of thing. And that's how it sort of developed. That was the idea behind it. It's had a number of people over the years. Mitchell played with us for a while after he left the Irish band, and he was involved in one of those lunchtime concerts where we played at the Wharves. they were very successful, those lunchtime concerts. It's amazing. That's one of the important things I think about what we did then without grants or anything in those days, was that by taking that music out to people and playing it to them in their lunch hours, we really did make contact with people with the music that really belonged to their own culture. If we just use an example of the concert we did at Tube Makers, which is a big factory down here, when we played there, that was our first concert, the workers threatened to strike because they reckoned the management was forcing culture on them in the lunch hour. We had terrible trouble with the card players at the back of the room when we first started off. But we did the Rybuck Shearer at one stage, and I gave an introduction talking about a fellow who sort of, always talked about what a great worker he was, but didn't deliver the goods. And somebody at the back of the room said, "That sounds like Mario." I'm sure the original Rybuck Shearer wasn't called Mario, but the tradition's the same. The same sort of attitude. And we had a similar experience at the Wharves, where I did Norman Brown. And at the end of the song, before anyone applauded, actually, although it obviously went over very well, a fellow leapt to his feet quite emotionally and yelled out, the head of our union, Tom McAleer, who was the head of, I think he was the president of the Wharfies at that stage. He said, the head of our union was there. He was there at Rothbury at that time. And the thing was, we were really making contact with people about with things that were related to their own lives. And I think that's essentially what really appeals to me about folk music, is that it covers the whole spectrum of working class people's lives. It's not locked into any one age group or anything else. It covers the whole thing, and it's a sort of art form of ordinary people. And that really is what Currency Folk was all about. It's never been a sort of fixed band, and I wonder really, whether there's any point continuing with it these days, but that's the idea behind it. Whatever we do will be based on that idea, whether it's called Currency Folk or not.
You were writing poetry at that stage.
Yes.
Did you start writing folk songs then too?
Not straight away, actually, because I think if you work in any field, as I suppose you know yourself, that you start to think in the terms of that sort of form. And the poetry that I write is very individual, personal stuff, whereas I think folk music, certainly the way I write it, the way I see it, has to be sort of class-based or group-based, so that you can't be writing totally personal things. It has to have a sort of contact with a sort of large body of opinion. If it isn't that, I don't think it really fits into my definition of what a folk song is. So I found that transition a little bit difficult.